Hong Kong, 1971. A woman weighing over 240 pounds stood inside a roped ring, fists raised, glaring down at the crowd. She had broken a man's collarbone 3 weeks earlier, shattered another's ribs before that. Nobody dared climb into that ring anymore. But the small man in the dark suit walking toward the apron didn't operate on fear. He operated on something else entirely. What happened next lasted less than 10 seconds. The woman's name was Mao Shan, and in the underground fighting circuits of Hong Kong, that name carried weight that had nothing to do with reputation and everything to do with physical consequence. She stood 5 feet 11 inches tall, carried 243 pounds across a frame built like a concrete pillar, and had been competing in unsanctioned boxing matches across Southeast Asia since she was 19 years old. By 1971, she was 27, undefeated in 31 consecutive bouts, and widely considered the most dangerous female fighter in the entire region. Not the most technical, not the most decorated, the most dangerous. There is a difference, and the difference matters. Mao Shan had grown up in the Kowloon-walled city, a dense vertical maze of interconnected buildings where sunlight was a rumour, and personal space was a concept that belonged to people who lived somewhere else. Her father ran a small noodle stand on the ground level. Her mother cleaned apartments in the buildings above. Neither of them could explain where their daughter's size came from. By 14, she was taller than every boy in her school. By 16, she was stronger than most of the men who worked the loading docks at Victoria Harbour. She found boxing the way a lot of people in Kowloon found things, through proximity and necessity. A retired Thai fighter named Kru Sombat ran an informal gym 3 floors above a garment factory. He trained young men who wanted to compete in underground circuits, where the rules were minimal and the payouts were enough to matter. When Mao Shan walked in and asked to train, Kru Sombat laughed. When she came back the next day, he laughed again. When she came back every single day for 2 straight weeks, he stopped laughing and handed her a pair of wraps. She was a natural in the way that word actually means something. Not gifted in the sense of easy talent, but built in a way that aligned with what boxing demands. Heavy hands, dense bone structure, a chin that absorbed punishment the way a wall absorbs rain. Kru Sombat taught her the fundamentals of Muay Thai striking, but Mao Shan gravitated toward Western boxing. Straight punches, hooks, uppercuts, the economy of hurting someone with your fists and nothing else. Within a year, she was sparring with the men in the gym. Within 2 years, she was beating them. The underground circuit in Hong Kong during the early 70s operated on a simple economic model. Fighters competed. Spectators bet. Organisers took a percentage. Venues changed weekly to avoid police attention. Matches happened in warehouses, on rooftops, in the back rooms of restaurants after closing. The crowds were mostly men, mostly working class, mostly there because watching 2 people fight was the most honest entertainment available for the price. Mao Shan entered her first official bout at 19 against a male opponent 40 pounds lighter than her. She knocked him out in the second round with a right hook that the ringside crowd later described, using language that suggested they had witnessed something closer to a traffic accident than a sporting event. After that, she fought regularly, once a month, sometimes twice. Men, women, it didn't matter. The circuit didn't separate by gender, because the circuit didn't care about categories. It cared about action, and Mao Shan provided action in abundance. Her record grew: 31 fights, 31 victories, 22 by knockout, the remaining 9 by opponents deciding that continuing was not in their long-term physical interest. By 1971, she had earned a reputation that preceded her into every venue, and that reputation had created a specific problem. Nobody wanted to fight her anymore. Which is exactly why she started issuing open challenges to the crowd. The open challenges began in the spring of 1971 and quickly became the main attraction at any event Mao Shan appeared in. The format was straightforward. After the scheduled bouts concluded for the evening, Mao Shan would remain in the ring. The announcer would offer the terms. Anyone willing to step inside the ropes and last 3 rounds against her would receive a cash prize equivalent to roughly 6 months of average wages in Hong Kong. 3 rounds, 9 minutes total. You didn't have to win, you didn't have to knock her down. You just had to survive without being knocked out or quitting. The money came from a pool funded by the organizers and supplemented by side bets from spectators who enjoyed watching brave men discover the distance between bravery and wisdom. In the first 4 months, 11 men accepted the challenge. None of them made it past the second round. The first challenger was a dock worker named Sang, who outweighed her by 30 pounds and believed that male strength was an automatic advantage over female anything. Mao Shan put him on the canvas in 90 seconds with a left hook to the liver that made him curl into a position typically associated with infancy. The second challenger was a Muay Thai practitioner visiting from Bangkok, who thought his kicking skills would keep her at distance. She walked through 2 leg kicks like they were suggestions, closed the gap, and dropped him with an overhand right that connected with the kind of sound that makes nearby spectators flinch involuntarily. The pattern repeated. Men climbed in confident. Men were carried out reconsidering. Word spread through the fighting community that Mao Shan's open challenge was less an opportunity and more a trap designed to look like an opportunity. By autumn of 1971, the challenges had become theatrical. Mao Shan understood spectacle. She would lean over the ropes after defeating whatever unfortunate volunteer had just attempted to collect the prize money, scan the crowd with deliberate slowness, and deliver some variation of the same message. Is there nobody else? Is this all Hong Kong has? Go home, little boys. Come back when you have learned what fighting actually requires. The crowds loved it and hated it simultaneously, which is the precise emotional combination that keeps people buying tickets. She was the villain they couldn't stop watching, the opponent they couldn't stop challenging, the problem nobody could solve. It was during one of these autumn events that the trajectory of Mao Shan's undefeated career intersected with something she had not anticipated and could not have prepared for. The venue that night was a converted textile warehouse in Mong Kok, a neighborhood where the streets were narrow and the buildings pressed together like commuters on a rush-hour ferry. The warehouse had been cleared of machinery and fitted with a makeshift ring constructed from welded pipe and shipping rope. Wooden benches surrounded the ring on 3 sides. The 4th side was reserved for standing room, which is where the serious gamblers positioned themselves because standing allowed for quicker access to the betting handlers who circulated through the crowd collecting wagers. Approximately 400 people filled the warehouse that evening. The scheduled fights had been adequate but unremarkable. 2 knockouts, 1 technical stoppage, and 2 decisions that satisfied nobody. The crowd was restless with the specific energy of people who had paid for excitement and received competence instead. Then the announcer stepped into the ring and delivered the words everyone had been waiting for. The champion Mao Shan now offers her open challenge. The warehouse responded with noise that bounced off corrugated metal walls and multiplied into something physical. And somewhere near the back of the standing section, a man in a dark fitted suit who had entered the warehouse 20 minutes earlier without being recognized by anyone turned to the friend beside him and said something quiet that would set the next hour of history into motion. The man in the dark suit was Bruce Lee, and the friend standing beside him was James Yim Lee, no relation by blood, but connected by the deeper kinship of shared obsession. James was a weightlifter and martial artist based in Oakland, who had been one of Bruce's earliest training partners in the United States, and had remained close even after Bruce relocated to Hong Kong to begin his film career. James was visiting for 2 weeks, and Bruce had suggested they spend the evening watching underground fights because Bruce believed you could learn more about combat watching amateurs fight under pressure than watching professionals perform under rules. They had arrived separately from the crowd, entering through a side door that a contact had arranged, and had positioned themselves in the standing section specifically because Bruce preferred to observe without being observed. By the autumn of 1971, Bruce Lee was famous in Hong Kong, but not yet the global icon he would become. The Big Boss had been released 2 months earlier and had shattered box office records across Southeast Asia. His face was on magazine covers and newspaper front pages. People recognized him in restaurants, on the street, in the markets where he shopped for groceries with his wife Linda. But in a dimly lit warehouse in Mong Kok, wearing a plain dark suit with no entourage and no announcement, he was just another face in a crowd of 400. Nobody looked twice at the compact man standing near the back wall with his arms folded and his eyes tracking every movement inside the ring, with the focus of someone cataloguing information for later use. Bruce had heard about Mao Shan before that evening. The underground fighting community in Hong Kong was small enough that reputations travelled efficiently. He knew about her record. He knew about the open challenges. He knew about the string of defeated men who had underestimated what 243 pounds of trained aggression could accomplish inside a confined space. He had come to watch, not to participate. That distinction is important because it establishes what happened next as unplanned, which makes it more remarkable than if it had been calculated. Mao Shan stepped into the ring after the final scheduled bout, and the warehouse atmosphere shifted from passive observation to active anticipation. She wore black shorts and a dark sleeveless top that revealed arms thick with the kind of muscle that comes not from aesthetic training, but from years of hitting heavy bags and heavier people. Her hands were wrapped in faded red cloth. Her hair was pulled back tight against her skull. She moved to the center of the ring with the unhurried confidence of someone who owns the space they occupy, and the crowd noise settled into a low hum of expectation. The announcer repeated the terms: 3 rounds, 9 minutes, survive and collect the prize. Mao Shan added her own commentary, delivered in Cantonese with a voice that carried over 400 people without effort. She called the crowd timid. She questioned their courage using language that was colourful enough to generate nervous laughter from the front rows. Then she leaned over the ropes, scanning faces the way a hawk scans a field, and delivered her signature dismissal. "Go home, little boys. There is nothing here for you." James Yim Lee glanced sideways at Bruce. Bruce's expression hadn't changed throughout the evening. The same focused neutrality he maintained whenever he was processing something. But James noticed a small shift, barely perceptible, a slight tilt of the head, a fractional narrowing of the eyes. The kind of micro-movement that people who knew Bruce well recognized as the visible edge of an internal calculation. James had seen that look before. It usually preceded something interesting. Bruce spoke without turning his head. She drops her left hand after every jab. Every single time. Habit. James waited because he understood Bruce was not finished thinking out loud. Her power is real, but her footwork is stationary. She plants and punches, effective against people who stand in front of her, useless against someone who refuses to be where she expects. James absorbed this analysis and asked the only relevant question. "You thinking about going up there?" Bruce was quiet for 3 full seconds, which in Bruce Lee's mental processing time represented a significant deliberation. Before Bruce could answer, the decision was made for him by circumstances that felt almost engineered by the universe. A man near the front of the standing section, drunk enough to be loud but sober enough to recognize a famous face, had turned around to survey the crowd and locked eyes directly on Bruce Lee. The recognition was instant and electric. His mouth opened and the words came out at a volume that sliced through the ambient warehouse noise like a blade through paper. "Bruce Lee is here. Bruce Lee is in the building." The effect was immediate and irreversible. 400 heads turned in sequence like dominoes falling in a chain. The murmur started low and built fast, a wave of whispered confirmations rippling through the warehouse as people verified with their own eyes what the drunk man had announced. Fingers pointed, bodies shifted. A gap opened around Bruce as people instinctively created space around celebrity, the way water parts around a stone. Mao Shan heard the name from inside the ring. She straightened from her leaning position against the ropes and looked toward the commotion near the back wall. Her expression shifted from theatrical contempt to genuine curiosity, which then transformed into something else entirely. Something that looked very much like opportunity. She had been performing for crowds for months, demolishing anonymous challengers who provided adequate entertainment, but no real narrative. Bruce Lee standing in her audience was not just a potential opponent, he was a storyline, the kind of storyline that elevates a local spectacle into a legend. She raised her voice above the crowd noise. The warehouse quieted with the speed that only happens when 2 points of intense interest converge into a single moment. Her Cantonese was clear and deliberately paced. So the movie star comes to watch real fighting. She let the word movie star carry the full weight of its intended condescension. Mao Shan pointed directly at Bruce with a wrapped hand. "I break men who are bigger than you every month. I break men who think they can fight because a camera makes them look fast. You make movies. I make men bleed. Big difference, little man." She paused and the warehouse held its collective breath. Come up here. Show these people if your kung fu is real or if it only works when a director tells you when to kick. The crowd erupted into the kind of chaos that only happens when spectacle exceeds expectation. 400 people talking simultaneously, arguments breaking out between those who wanted to see it happen and those who thought it was disrespectful. Gamblers already calculating odds and reaching for their wallets. The organizers near the ring exchanging panicked glances because an unscheduled confrontation involving the most famous martial artist in Hong Kong was either the best thing that could happen to their operation or the worst, with very little space between those outcomes. James Yim Lee put a hand on Bruce's shoulder, a gesture that contained an entire conversation compressed into physical contact. The hand said, "Don't do this, and be careful, and this is beneath you all at once." Bruce looked at James, and the expression on his face was not anger. It was not ego. It was something closer to professional obligation. She just questioned the legitimacy of everything I teach in front of 400 witnesses. If I walk away from this, every student I've trained and every student I will ever train inherits that silence as an answer. James understood immediately, because James understood Bruce. There are challenges you can decline privately and challenges that become permanent if you decline them publicly. This was the second kind. Bruce removed his jacket and handed it to James. The crowd saw the jacket come off, and the noise level reached a pitch that the corrugated metal walls amplified into something almost overwhelming. Bruce walked forward through the crowd, which parted ahead of him, with the unconscious deference that people show when they recognize someone moving with absolute purpose. Each step closer to the ring increased the tension inside the warehouse by a measurable degree. Mao Shan watched him approach. Her expression settled into something hard and certain. She had wanted this response. She had engineered this moment. And she believed with the full conviction of 31 undefeated fights that she knew exactly how this was going to end. Bruce reached the ring apron and placed both hands on the edge of the canvas. He paused there for a moment, looking up at Mao Shan the way an architect looks at a building, not with intimidation but with assessment. She towered above him from the elevated platform. The visual was striking and undeniable. She was nearly half a foot taller, outweighed him by over 100 pounds, and occupied the center of the ring with the territorial authority of someone who had never been forced to surrender that ground. Bruce pulled himself onto the apron and stepped through the ropes with an economy of movement that made the action look rehearsed, though it was entirely instinctive. The warehouse volume dropped sharply as 400 people collectively transitioned from excitement into focused attention. The organizer closest to the ring, a thin man in a wrinkled shirt who had been chain-smoking nervously since the confrontation began, stepped between them with his hands raised. He spoke rapidly in Cantonese, trying to establish terms before the situation outpaced his ability to manage it. 1 round, 3 minutes, same rules as the open challenge. No strikes to the groin, no eye gouging, no biting. Everything else was permitted. He looked at Bruce for confirmation. Bruce nodded once without breaking eye contact with Mao Shan. He looked at Mao Shan. She smiled the way predators smile when prey walks voluntarily into range. She nodded. The organizer backed away quickly with the urgency of someone removing himself from a space that was about to become inhospitable. A timekeeper near the corner raised a metal pipe and struck it against a hanging steel plate. The sound cut through the warehouse air with a sharp metallic ring that served as the starting bell. And 400 people stopped breathing simultaneously. Mao Shan moved first. She closed distance immediately with the directness of someone who had ended dozens of fights by overwhelming opponents before they could establish rhythm. Her left jab came out fast, faster than her size suggested was possible, aimed squarely at Bruce's face. It was the same jab that had preceded every knockout in her record, a rangefinder designed to measure distance and freeze opponents long enough for the right hand to follow with authority. Bruce moved his head 3 inches to the right. The jab passed close enough that the displaced air brushed his cheek. He did not step back. He did not raise his hands to block. He simply was not where the punch arrived. Mao Shan recognized a miss and did what her training dictated. The right hand followed immediately, a cross thrown with the rotational force of her entire body weight behind it. 243 pounds of committed momentum channeled through her right fist, toward the space Bruce Lee's head currently occupied. Bruce shifted his weight to his lead foot and angled his torso backward, just enough that the cross sailed past his chin by an inch. Still, he did not retreat. Still, he remained directly in front of her, at a range that should have been suicidal for someone his size. Mao Shan threw a left hook, the punch that had broken the dockworker's will and collapsed the Muay Thai fighter's consciousness. It was wide and devastating and carried enough force to restructure bone. Bruce dropped his level by bending his knees 4 inches, and the hook passed over his head with the sound of disturbed air. 3 punches, 3 misses. 4 seconds had elapsed. Mao Shan's expression flickered for the first time since the confrontation began. Not fear, not yet. Confusion. The particular confusion of someone executing techniques that have always worked, discovering that always is a word with limitations. She reset her stance and measured the man in front of her with new calculation. He was still there, still close, still breathing calmly with his hands held in a position she did not recognize from any style she had encountered. Not a boxing guard, not a traditional kung fu stance. Something fluid and neutral that seemed to offer openings everywhere while protecting everything. She attacked again. Jab, cross, hook, uppercut. A 4-punch combination delivered with violent intention and genuine speed. Bruce navigated through all 4 strikes with movements so minimal they barely qualified as evasion. Each punch missed by margins measured in centimeters rather than inches. He was reading her patterns before her muscles finished receiving the commands her brain was sending. 7 seconds in total had now passed, and Mao Shan had thrown 7 strikes with full power and full commitment, and had connected with nothing except empty space, shaped exactly like Bruce Lee. 8 seconds. Mao Shan launched another offensive, this time abandoning combination work in favor of raw aggression. She surged forward, throwing continuous punches without pause, each one aimed at a different target. Head, body, attempting to fill so much space with flying fists that evasion became geometrically impossible. It was the strategy of a bulldozer, not elegant, but devastatingly effective against anyone trapped in its path. Against every previous opponent, this forward avalanche had produced results within seconds. Bodies crumbled, guards collapsed. Men who believed they could weather the storm discovered that the storm was heavier than their preparations had accounted for. But Bruce was not weathering anything. He was flowing, each movement connected to the next in a continuous chain that had no beginning or end, only redirection. He circled to her left, then reversed to her right, then angled forward past her shoulder, each transition arriving before her eyes could track the previous one. Mao Shan was throwing punches at memory, at where he had been a fraction of a second earlier, her fists chasing shadows while the man casting them had already relocated. 9 seconds. And then Bruce Lee decided the lesson had been delivered long enough. What happened in the next second would become the only thing anyone in that warehouse talked about for years afterward. Mao Shan threw another right cross, fully committed with her weight shifting forward, and her rear foot pivoting the way Crew Sombat had taught her years ago in that gym above the garment factory. The punch was technically sound and devastatingly powerful, and aimed at a target that was no longer available. Bruce had already moved inside the arc of her arm, occupying a space so close to her body that her extended punch had no leverage and no function. He was inside her range, inside her guard, inside the architecture of her fighting system, at a distance where none of her weapons could operate. From that position, Bruce struck, not with the theatrical fury of a movie sequence, not with the wild aggression of an underground brawler, with precision so refined it resembled something closer to surgery than combat. His right fist connected with her solar plexus in a straight punch that travelled no more than 6 inches from chamber to target. 6 inches of distance, but within those 6 inches was compressed everything Bruce Lee understood about generating force through alignment rather than wind-up, through structure rather than size, through the exact coordination of breath and bone and intention, arriving at a single point at a single moment. The impact was immediate and total. Mao Shan's forward momentum stopped as though a switch had been thrown. Her body registered the strike before her consciousness could process it. The air evacuated her lungs in a sharp, involuntary burst. Her legs, which had carried her through 31 victories and hundreds of training rounds without ever failing, simply stopped receiving coherent instructions from her nervous system. She folded, not dramatically, not cinematically, but with the honest gracelessness of a body whose operating system had been momentarily interrupted. Her knees hit the canvas first, then her hands. Then she was on all fours, gasping with the desperate mechanical rhythm of someone whose diaphragm has temporarily forgotten its primary function. 10 seconds. The entire exchange from the opening bell to Mao Shan's knees touching canvas had occupied 10 seconds of elapsed time. The warehouse did not erupt. The warehouse went silent. 400 people who had come expecting entertainment encountered something that exceeded the category entirely. The silence lasted 3 full seconds, which in a room full of excited spectators represents an eternity of collective processing. Then the noise came. Not cheering exactly, something more complicated than cheering. The sound of 400 people simultaneously attempting to reconcile what they had expected to see with what they had actually witnessed. Arguments erupted immediately. People standing next to each other who had watched the same 10 seconds described completely different events. The timekeeper sat motionless with the steel pipe still raised because he had forgotten his function entirely. The organizer in the wrinkled shirt stood frozen at ringside, with a cigarette burning unattended between his fingers, ash growing long and precarious. And in the center of the ring, Mao Shan remained on her hands and knees, breathing in ragged gulps, staring at the canvas beneath her with the expression of someone encountering a reality that did not match any version of the world she had previously inhabited. Bruce did not celebrate. He did not raise his fists. He did not turn to the crowd or acknowledge the chaos erupting around the ring. He stood approximately 4 feet from where Mao Shan knelt and waited with the patience of someone who understood that what happened in the next minute mattered more than what had happened in the previous 10 seconds. The timekeeper never struck the steel plate to signal the end of the round, because technically the round had not ended. Mao Shan had not been counted out. No official had stepped in to stop the contest. She was simply on the canvas, trying to remember how breathing worked, while the man who had put her there stood nearby with no visible urgency and no apparent desire to inflict anything further. 30 seconds passed. Mao Shan's breathing gradually transitioned from desperate gasping to something resembling a controlled rhythm. She lifted her head and looked at Bruce for the first time since the strike had landed. Her expression carried none of the theatrical menace she had worn before the fight. What replaced it was something raw and unguarded. Not humiliation, not anger. Recognition. The specific recognition that arrives when someone discovers their understanding of something fundamental has been incomplete, and the discovery happens too publicly to be denied or rationalized away. She pushed herself to one knee, then to both feet. She stood upright, unsteady for a moment, then stable. The warehouse crowd quieted as they watched her rise because the question of what she would do next suddenly felt more compelling than the spectacle of what Bruce had done. Would she attack again? Would she curse him? Would she demand a rematch? The possibilities cycled through 400 minds simultaneously. Mao Shan did none of those things. She walked to Bruce on legs that were still negotiating their return to full function. She stopped in front of him, close enough for conversation but far enough to maintain the formality of 2 fighters acknowledging each other. She looked down at him because the height difference had not changed, even though everything else between them had. And then she bowed. Not a shallow, performative bow. A deep, deliberate bow that originated from the waist and held at its lowest point for 3 full seconds. In the fighting culture of Hong Kong, in the underground circuits where respect was earned exclusively through physical consequence, that bow communicated something that language would have diminished. It said, "I understand now." It said I was wrong about what I thought I knew. It said you could have destroyed me, and you chose to teach me instead, and I recognize the difference. Bruce returned the bow with equal depth and equal sincerity. When they both straightened, Bruce spoke to her in Cantonese quiet enough that only she in the nearest corner of the crowd could hear. "You have real power. Genuine. Earned. But power without perception is a wave crashing against rock. It spends itself completely and the rock remains. Learn to see before you strike. Learn to understand before you overwhelm. Your strength is remarkable. Make your awareness match it, and nobody will be able to stand against you." Mao Shan listened without interrupting, which for a woman who had spent months taunting crowds and belittling challengers represented a fundamental shift in orientation. She asked one question, "Will you teach me?" Bruce shook his head gently. "I cannot teach you your path, but I can tell you that the path you are on has more in it than you have found so far. Keep searching. Train with people who are better than you in ways you do not expect. That is where growth lives." They spoke for another 15 minutes outside the ring while the warehouse gradually returned to its normal post-event rhythm of settling bets and replaying highlights. James Yim Lee stood nearby, holding Bruce's jacket, watching the conversation with the quiet satisfaction of someone witnessing the thing that confirmed why he had dedicated years to training alongside this particular human being. When Bruce and Mao Shan finally parted, she gripped his hand with both of hers and held it for a moment longer than custom required. Mao Shan continued fighting after that night. Her record eventually reached 45 victories. But people who watched her compete in the months and years following that evening in Mongkok noticed something different in how she operated inside the ring. She became less predictable, more patient. She developed the habit of watching opponents for longer before engaging, reading patterns before committing power. She fought like someone who had been shown in 10 seconds that everything she relied on could be rendered irrelevant by someone who understood something she had not yet grasped, and who had spent every training session afterward trying to grasp it. Bruce Lee gave many demonstrations throughout his life. He won challenge matches and proved his philosophy against doubters repeatedly. But that evening in a converted textile warehouse in Mongkok was different because it was unplanned, unscripted, and witnessed by 400 people who watched a woman with 31 victories and absolute certainty discover in 10 seconds that certainty is the most dangerous illusion a fighter can carry. That is what masters do. They do not merely defeat, they reveal, and revelation, unlike defeat, lasts forever.